Hello and welcome to Military Mantra. In this interview, we have today Colonel Amit Dabas, YSM. In this interview, we'll try to understand his journey of joining Indian Army, life in the Indian Army in the Parachute Regiment, and various life lessons that he has learned over his service. So thanks a lot, sir, for coming on this interview and welcome.
Thanks, Akash. First up, thank you for having me here on your channel. And since you reached out to me, I have taken a look at your channel, and I think you're bringing a lot of value to society. So thank you for that from me and from a lot of veterans who've been talking about you. Thanks a lot, and happy to be here.
Thank you, sir. So if you could start telling us, how was your journey before joining the Indian Army, and what was your motivation back then to join the Fauj?
Okay, I come from a Fauji family. So my dad was in the army, spent 32 years. And we have 3 brothers and a sister. All 3 joined the army. My sister got married into the army. So so through and through Fauji. My elder brother is also from the Special Forces, serving brigadier at the moment. My younger brother, he is short service commission officer, who was in the Garhwal Rifles, moved out after 5 years in the corporate sector now. And my sister, unfortunately, we lost her a few years back to an accident, but she was also married to the army. And on top of that, my maternal grandfather, he was a paratrooper himself. And he jumped over North Africa and fought against Roman forces in World War II as part of the British Army. And so I've had a typical Fauji brat kind of bringing up, in the sense that we move base every now and then. Studied from 11 schools to pass out from my 12th. And if you think that's a lot, my brother studied from 13 actually. So moved a lot, stayed away from my father for obvious reasons, because he was deployed in the field. And growing up in school, surprisingly for many people who have seen my Fauji side, I was a huge performer, academic performer in school. And so my mother always thought I'd become a rocket scientist. To be, because my brother joined NDA before me, and I followed suit shortly thereafter. And so far as motivation is concerned, we grew up, and my father was always, in the house talking about how it's an honorable profession, is the easiest way to an honest living. And we ourselves were very enamored by the Fauji life. It had a lot to offer. We were surrounded by stories of valor of people we knew personally ourselves. There was sports and adventure. We could sense the palpable, camaraderie between officers and men from the tough time and the good time that they had spent together. And while the men were away, deployed in field areas or in operations, the families in cantonment areas were bonding, at a wholly different level. And they were there through thick and thin, and so that drew people closer, and it became a world of its own. And so we grew up wanting to be continue to be part of that world. And I think the final thing that was also there was the immense amount of respect we got from we saw the army men getting from the countrymen. And so time after time, the surveys that you have, and you would read up about the respect for the army being one of the most respected professions in the country. So obviously, we grew up with this kind of an environment. We always wanted to continue to be part of it. So that's how we landed up there.
Okay. So if you could also speak about your experience in the service selection board, and what tips you would like to give to the aspirants who will be appearing for SSB.
Okay, SSB was a long time back. That was 1992. It was at Allahabad. And Allahabad, I don't know if it is still the case, when we were going for this, it was called not a selection center, but a rejection center. I'm not trying to demotivate anyone, but that's the, that's the story that was on at that point in time. So it was the first of its kind experience for me. Traveled on my own, stayed in a dormitory with a bunch of, similarly aged kids. And we also had the CDS people there at the same point in time. So they were like, college pass outs, and we were just out of 12. And so, gradually, we gravitated, irrespective of the age differences that we had, we gravitated to each other because of the common interests over the few days that we spent there. But reaching there was peer pressure. We looked around, we saw people were really well prepared. They would, make us feel that they were really well prepared and we weren't so well prepared. So the typical exam kind of an environment that we experience in school, just at a heightened level, was there. And we would in our minds war game failure, that, the pressure of family and friends, selection nahi hua to kya, the typical thing that crosses a youngster's mind. So, but it was the first time we were experiencing it. So that again, stayed with me as a memory. And like I said, we made new friends. We felt very sad for those who didn't make it, because we had developed friendships, and we were very empathetic, because we knew as the days progressed, we could also be joining their ranks. So we were very, very, despite the fact that while there was an elation as we moved on from one stage to the other, but there was still a sense of loss for the comrades that we had moved out. During the SSB, for some reason, while going through the basis of the SSB, I got naturally, I think, accepted as a leader in the group that I was in. I was physically weak. Okay, like I said, I was into academics and all that, and so I was a typical bespectacled, academic performer who wasn't great physically, but I had a lot of determination, and I actually reveled in the speaking assignments. When I was asked to speak, whether the group discussions, even the interviews, I really enjoyed the interviews. So, in fact, that was my favorite part. A 1 hour plus of just talking and with that person sitting there and listening to you. I really enjoyed that. So that was SSB for me. And when the results were being declared, how it is, you always feel that consecutive guys never make it. So I still remember my chest number was 13, 12 made it, and I thought this was going to jump over me, but then he said 13, and I was so happy at the point in time, okay, because that was quite an achievement for me, having traveled all the way from home and going back to, and my brother already in NDA, and I was really looking forward to joining there. So that's how it was. And then so far as tips for the aspirants concerned, well, that is a subject in itself, but I'll restrict myself to, maybe 3 or 5 of them. First, of course, is prepare well. Now, there's no gain saying that you have to know what happens at SSB. So, Sun Tzu, the great Chinese philosopher, very famously said, know yourself and know the enemy, and you will never be in peril in 100 battles. And the same applies here and even in life. So you know the assessment method, know what goes on the SSB on a minute-to-minute thing. So you should not be surprised by anything. You should be able to do a war game, how it's going to be done. So you have to be really well prepared. And I think currently people have that advantage when knowledge is free. There's so many things being thrown at you. So you really can pick and choose what and keep yourself well informed. It wasn't so during our time. We used to have one thickish, NDA, CDS kind of a volume, which was more for the written exam than the SSB, and a few pamphlets for SSB, but nothing more than that was around. Now this, profusion of academies where people go through the SSB bases and all that wasn't so prevalent. I mean, I never went through it. So, so make the most of the things that are available to you at the moment, but prepare well. Don't have knowledge gaps once you reach there. Second, and I think that this is an extremely important part, is the articulation. It comes through practice. You should be able to express yourself in written and verbal form. You should be extremely confident about this aspect. So, while you would do a SWOT analysis for yourself, where the strengths and weaknesses are yours, opportunity and threats of the SSB throws at you, identify what your gaps are in your competencies. And if articulation is one of them, I would suggest that, get down in the right earnest to eliminate it and make it a strong point. And I'm sure that's because, see, articulation is nothing more than implanting the image in your head into the head of the listener, or an idea that's in your head, transferring it to the head of the listener without loss of anything. So nothing should be lost in translation. Third, I think don't over-analyze and over-try. That will make you look fake. I think that's something that gets told a lot with SSB original. And I think there's meaning to that. Then seek out knowledge and your competency gaps. I've already told you that. But when I say competency gaps, other than even articulation, in case you think there is something, the competency required to SSB, once you research it, once you speak to people. So in case there's a shortfall, try and make up for it. There are ways and means you can make up for it. Last and most important thing, I think, is that, I just spoke about how there was peer pressure, there was a fear of failure within us. But I think the correct candidate would hit the services selection board with a hope for success rather than a fear of failure. Because a fear of failure clutters the brain, it diminishes your thinking ability, and consequently the actions are not prompt. And there's lack of confidence and coherence when you answer, go through the basis and assessment. But in case you have hope for success, because you're confident, you're well prepared, then I think it should not be such a tough ask.
Got it. Something about the officer-like qualities, that is OLQs. So, what is your perspective about it? Since you retired as a very senior officer, now that you look back, how did you develop those qualities, or can these be developed, or does it eventually get developed in the training?
Yeah, so OLQ is something that the entire officer cadre holds very close to its heart, and sometimes a bit of cynicism also gets associated with it. But I think it's extremely important to identify what OLQs are, and identify how they are defined, and identify them within yourself. And they're nothing more than a list of aspirational character traits, and that's what they are. They are the expectations of the of the men that you command, the leaders, your superiors in the forces, or in life, the peers around you, and most importantly, if you're armed forces officer, the expectation of the nation from you. So if all of these people, they tend to hold an officer to a certain standard, and that standard is officer-led qualities. In a situation, an officer is expected to behave in a particular manner, and when there's a shortfall in that, that's a lack of OLQ. And if you rise to that standard, then of course that means you do have that OLQ. Okay. Now interpretation may vary. People who will join the armed forces, once you become an officer, you'll find that OLQ get distilled and they take on a very different meaning. But when you're joining the forces, they're slightly different. But all in all, you don't have to, think about 15, 20, 25 OLQs. I would say that the entire lot of OLQs can get distilled into 5. Okay. And those are firstly a logical thought process, whether it's intelligence or, anything to do with how to formulate your ideas in your brain and to be able to, coherently arrange them in a logical thought process. And that applies to situations, that applies to a question that is asked of you, anything. So a logical thought process, I think, is one. Second is the capability, like I said, to articulate. Extremely important. Written word, written form, and verbal. Very important, because what that logical thought process counts for nothing in case you're not able to transfer it to the person who's listening to you. Okay. Yes. So that's the second one. Third is a sense of ownership. I mean, in life, you will come across a lot of people subsequently who are the kings of that. This is not my job. Who tend to keep their vision very narrow, their efforts very narrow. But I think these services look for people who have a sense of acute ownership, extreme ownership. Okay, so that gives you a sense of mission orientation. That it's not just a narrow thing that you have to do as part of a team, but the entire mission. You take ownership of the mission, you try and accomplish it. That's number 3. Fourth is integrity. Integrity, they say it's either 100 or 0, but there are integrity, as you would. So integrity is the fourth, and I think fifth is collaboration. That is teamwork, placing the team before yourself. So these 5. And out of this, whenever you read about OLQs, everything will flow from these 5. And if you want to distill it even further, if somebody was to ask you, and I asked this of a lot of people, and I've tried to answer it myself. I think sincerity is that one officer quality that overrides everything. Sincerity of intent and sincerity of effort. That is sincerity in thought and action. So that, in case you have that kind of sincerity in both thought and action, everything else falls into place. So that's OLQ. But was I aware of it, or when I went to SSB? Not really. I don't think so. I was aware of it. Like I said, the sources of information were less. But going to SSB, the way I had prepared was, of course, read up whatever I had to a little what was available. But other than that, my father was already a serving officer. I remember having a 30-minute session with him. And in those 30 minutes, he spoke of OLQs. He didn't tell me what's going to happen in SSB and all that, but he spoke about, about things which mattered and which said that this is what an officer is, this is what you have to aspire for. So when you go to SSB, this is the ideal that you have to look to. And everything else, you'll get your answers, you'll get the correct, what they're looking for. The moment you know what an ideal officer is, and the officer is defined by the OLQ. Other than that, I remember having a 60-minute session with an ex-GTO, a group training officer who had served earlier. I had a 60-minute session with him. These are the 2 sessions that I really had, and nothing more than that. Thereafter, I went to SSB. But I remember that OLQ was something that both the officers did harp on and said that this is what you have to aspire for.
Got it, sir. So after that, you went to NDA and then subsequently to IMA. If I can ask you, any memories that you have from your life in the academy which you still cherish and want to share with the aspirants?
Okay, NDA and IMA is nothing but memories, honestly. Okay, so we churn them out at NDA and IMA by the hour, if not by the minute. It's nothing but a sequence of memories, sequence of events. It's jam-packed. Okay, there's no better place that will teach you time management like NDA and IMA. All right, so every minute is booked, and between those minutes you have to look for times to do other things, and it's a wonderful place to be. It actually changes you. Okay, and those who have been us who have been lucky enough to have undergone 3 years at NDA, 1 at time in 4 years, I think we carry forward a lot. And not that the people who came back to IMA, it's just a matter of a year or so, and everybody evens out, and they have it really tough, I would say, coming in and doing it in 1.5 years what we did it in 4. So actually a tough ask, if you ask me, but they come out with flying colors. By the time we're passing out, everybody's at even keel. You really cannot distinguish between an ex-NDA and a direct entry at that point in time. So I think they do pretty well in that short span of time. The first impression at NDA for me, I remember we went in about a week before the people were to come back from the term break, and so the academy was nobody around, and we were the first timers were the only ones there, and we walked around all those places that were later going to become out of bounds for us when the academy was full swing. We didn't know. And we went around, had a look-see at various places, and we thought this is heaven. I mean, this is not India. It's beautiful. And for all of those who have seen the academy, it really is all over the world. Okay, and we're very elated to be there, very, very proud. But like I said, one moment the people were back, it absolutely changed. It became a very demanding routine, mentally and physically exhausting. But what it did was it gave us a yardstick in life. And like I said, everything and anything for several years that we did, we compare and say, oh, we've done that. No problem, we'll do this also. So it gave a yardstick. Later on in life, we got several other yardsticks in pretty quick time, which, in terms of difficulties outshone NDA and IMA by several yards. But still, it was extremely good to have those yardsticks as a teenager. And we would, realize once we were to come back on our term breaks, and interact with our friends and with our classmates who were still in the city street. And we used to realize the difference that our personalities were undergoing because of what we were going through at the academy. So it's a pretty good, mix of a very packed routine, sports and adventure. We would have service specific training that was done, whether you're from the Army, Navy, Air Force, you do that kind of a training there. And we had a plethora of subjects to study. A person who was from the science background would study military history and military geography. People from the arts would study physics, chemistry also. And then we had workshop classes, where we would go don a overall or a dangari and go in and do work on a lathe machine, make jobs. And we had engineering drawing, and we had leadership classes, and you name it. So there are lots and lots of subjects that are taught there at NDA and IMA, and so it's a very, very well-rounded development that takes place there. And so far as memorable incidents concerned, I mean, of course, like I said, it's a dime a dozen, and every sports trophy that we won was memorable. And whenever we get together, we remember those times. Remember some final matches which were fought tooth and nail, and then there were punishments that we underwent, which were physically demanding, and especially so when we got them in our younger terms. There's a single fort. I don't know if you guys, people would have. It's a pretty famous fort there in the vicinity of NDA. And once you get a punishment called endurance like EH, so it's about 22 odd kilometers going and coming back, but it's pretty steep. And for a kid that young, about 16 and a half, 17 years old, with a pack on his back, and so it is a tough thing. And we used to, even that incident used to, or that event also, we used to convert into memory. I think I remember we used to get about 4 hours to do it. Okay. So it used to start at 6, I think, and you had to be back by 10. And you start from a particular place, come back at that particular place in 4 hours. So you considered completed. And used to get packed breakfast at single. So once you hit that fort, the single fort, you would be given a packed breakfast. And so we would make an event out of it by, challenging ourselves and doing it in 3 hours. And what that did was, so we would forego the breakfast at the top and rush back to the academy by 9 o'clock. Back to our rooms, change, take a bath, change, and we used to have hot breakfast in mess. And that used to be a sense of accomplishment that despite Singapore, we had a hot breakfast in mess. So for a kid, those kind of memories actually carried weight. And there used to be endurance ET route, endurance training, and that used to be a periphery route where it used to be pretty hot during the summer months. So even those are great memories that we had. And breakfast on a daily basis was a great memory for a NDA cadet. You're tired to the bone and forever hungry because of the amount of calories you're burning on a daily basis. And so breakfast was something we look forward to. That's a special memory for us. We've gone back to NDA several times. And at certain events wherein we would be allowed in the cadets mess and have the same breakfast all over again, and we've always relished the memories that came with it. Then there are camps at NDA and IMA, at various terms, and the mini Josh runs and the Josh runs, basically the run backs of varying distances, where you navigate and cover distance with your entire squad or your company. Those are again very, very memorable ones. And so whenever we get together. With the postmates, those are things that we remember very, 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 very keenly. And then, of course, there are other things that teenagers get together and do, which I really can't mention here, and which are borderline, between discipline and indiscipline. But those things are there, and those are also memories that happen in the cadets. Yeah.
Got it, sir. So after IMA, you went to Parachute Regiment. So what was your motivation to join the Paras?
Yeah, so my brother, I said, he had preceded me, but he had not gone to Paras. He had joined my father's battalion. And I also wanted to actually join my father's battalion because that's a sense of tradition that the army gives you. And but he had joined it already. And then I was told very clearly that I really couldn't join. And at NDA, I had a battalion commander called Col Amit from the Madras Regiment, which is extremely keen that I should join the Madras Regiment. And in fact, while I was passing out, he was still at NDA, he came over to IMA to persuade me again. But at IMA, I had a commandant, General Inder Verma from Gurkhas, who was very keen that I should join his battalion. Because as a teenager, excelling at certain sports and boxing and cross country and success. So people, the officers were there. They're also looking out for good people for their own, good cadets for their own battalions. So. But since I was not getting to join my father's battalion, and I did not want to join any other, I was in a fix at IMA, and that's when my father, I got a message one day that I have a phone call. My father is not one who ever called me, but I was surprised to find that my father on the call, and he said, "Okay, so what are you opting for?" And I said, "Okay, I'm in dilemma because I really don't know." And then he told me that there is this battalion called 10 Paras, and why didn't you consider it? I said the reason is, he says that I've seen them in Sri Lanka in Operation Power. My father was there as in the division headquarters, and he says that that the entire bunch of 10 I've seen are extremely courageous. Despite the pressures of combat, you never have falsehoods around. And they never refuse a task, and they're actually, a bunch of alpha males, and I think I'll be really proud if you go to. So I said, okay, fine. So that's where I'll go. And so I opted for it, and fortunately I did get it. I was commissioned directly into 10 SF, and that's how it actually happened. And 10 SF had a very notorious reputation at that point in time. Not very many people getting selected there, similar to Allahabad SSB, I think. But fortunately, I was one of those who made it after a long time, and pretty happy with how things turned out. And so when it was declassified by the commandant that I've been commissioned to 10 SF, I was leaving year to year, very happy about the whole thing. Yeah, so that's how it landed at there.
So we have seen a lot of videos on Discovery and a lot of other channels about the probation. So how does the probation in 10 para SF look like? Whatever details you can tell us.
Yeah, probation is okay. I know I've also seen glimpses of those programs. I really haven't seen them in detail, and they give you an insight into probation. And see, probation is just to give an example of my own probation. I did the probation in Jodhpur in June to August, which are like extremely hot summer months for Jodhpur. So it was pretty taxing. We 125 of us who started. That was one officer, 124 at the time, who started it. 7 of us made it through that probation. And for an officer, it is doubly difficult. And the reason being that you are doing the probation with the men who you're going to serve with, who you're going to lead in operations. So there's double scrutiny. It's not just any instructor, or it's not unsupervised, but the men around you. I mean, you are being judged all the time. So it's extremely difficult, and that sense of purpose and responsibility that gives you, that is the time that you realize that from a cadet now you'll be transitioning into an officer, because the sense of responsibility that starts weighing on you. During probation, and just to even everybody out, we don't wear our ranks, and everybody looks the same. So the officer, there's no difference in your treatment, the way you sleep, where you sleep, and everything the same. But the sense of responsibility is so acute because you're doing it with the men, and you tend to put your best foot forward and outperform in all spheres. So it would generally be accepted that in case you have a written assessment of sorts during probation, that the officer would excel. But the men are extremely motivated. The men are extremely smart. They're intelligent. The sense of motivation, pushes them to actually compete with the officer in intellectually. And the officer, because you don't want to be left behind, doesn't want to be, the men are, as it is, really good with physical activity themselves. The officers don't want to be left behind. So it's just a competition all around. It's a very intense activity, intense time. Again, like I said, very quickly we got some yardsticks which were more than what the academy had to offer. So probation was one of them. Things were, more acute than what we had seen in the academy. And while you're doing probation, it appears unreasonable at times. Okay, but it's not. But it's when you realize that once you yourself become a probation officer, formulate training programs and probation cadres. So behind the scenes, everything is network and everything makes sense. But what you see is bits and pieces. And the reason is that you never know what's around the corner. You're never told, actually. And that's the sense of, being comfortable with the unknown, with the uncertainty, is something that is inbuilt into the probation. And that is actually what kills people. So in 10, what they do is, and it varies from time to time, but in 10, what they do is they have a laminated non-volunteer form signed, and you have to carry it in your breast pocket everywhere. Okay, so any activity is there, you have to carry that with you. And so any person who feels like he's breaking now has the liberty to just get up, pick that out, and hand it over to the instructor to say, okay, I'm done. And I remember one point in time, we just finished 40 km speed march. So we waited for whoever had to finish it, and those guys came in, and thereafter, we were thinking that we're done for the day, and we'll now, get some rest because the next day is another day in itself. And then they got us together, asked us to put on our packs, and they said we're going for another 40. And I remember within the first 5 kilometers, after we were asked to put on our packs and restart the whole thing, within the first 5 kilometers, about 10-12 people just gave their non-pack. They said we're not doing this anymore. So it's not that we had to do another 40. Of course, we did a few kilometers beyond that, and called it off. But the point is that it will push you into that uncertain zone, into that where you feel that I cannot go on anymore. And it's the men who continue beyond that who get to stay on, and then others, nothing wrong or some less than others, but I think that the threshold was slightly less, and they decided to call it off at a certain point in time. So they move on. Similarly, we had a funny incident during a survival exercise. We went to a third day. Our tongues were swollen because of lack of water. When you get dehydrated, tongue swells up, fills your mouth, and lips were cracked and bleeding, and we were walking. It was, like I said, pretty hot, and even the nights were pretty hot despite the desert. And we were walking all the time, and we were very dehydrated, and we were doing it in buddy pairs. And so you have buddy pairs and you have it singly. So you're doing it buddy pairs, and the person with me, I still, well, he unfortunately didn't make it. And we were passing or bypassing a village, and he saw a hand pump, and he was so overcome because of the dehydration. And that poor kid, he went and put his mouth to the tap, and of course, because it was so dry, his lips got stuck to that. I had such a tough time pulling him off. It's such a bloody mess. His skin came off, and within myself, I was laughing so hard because the sheer idiocy of the whole thing. It's the sheer stupidity that how the mind has stopped functioning, and because the pressure, he's just succumbed, and like it's more the mess is much more than what it was. So a poor decision on his part, but that is how it turned out. And so there are events like these where people crumble under pressure, or people sustain the pressure and perform. That becomes memories from the probation days, and that is people who are able to sustain it, they make it. And to be fair, every special forces battalion is looking for good people who can actually sustain. So to say that the system is somehow too tough, or we have to just see whether or not we are good enough for the system, and not question the system at all. I think it's a pretty well laid out, pretty scientific, and it's stood the test of time so far. Yeah.
Got it, sir. So since you were a paratrooper, so how was your first experience when you jumped out of an aircraft?
So when I jumped out of the aircraft, I had gone on they call it a para hike from IMA in third term, or between the second and third term. So you finish the second term, and then you get to go on adventure hikes. So I chose to go to Agra to do Parajumps. So the bunch of us who went there, that's the time we did our Parajumps. And thereafter, I went on to do my para basic in 1996 with the 10 paras, jumping out of AL-30, the same as what we did from IMA. And later on, I became a qualified combat free faller. Of course, though that's a different volume altogether. And so in the basic, you do 4 day jumps and 1 night jump. And of course, all said and done, it's an extraordinary activity. And it's unique from the point of view of the mix of emotions the paratrooper goes through. And it happens all the time. It's just that you get used to those emotions later. So there'll be anxiety, there'll be apprehension, before the jump goes in. Then there'll be when you jump out, and suddenly everything is silent. When the canopy is starting to open up, this feeling of loneliness. Then there's brotherhood on the ground. There's like silence and chaos all inbuilt into it. Then there's release and relief, and then of course happiness on the ground. So this is a mix of emotions, and within that short span of time, that makes paratrooping an extremely wonderful activity. And people who love this rush, so they do it for sport or for a living, like paratroopers do. And God forbid if there is an emergency, there's a malfunction of a chute or something, then there's a renewed anxiety, which is now bordering around on fear. And then the cycle repeats itself. But all in all, it finally culminates into happiness all around, hopefully. Yeah. So that's paratrooping for you. And I was the same kind of emotions that I also went through. And as an officer, when you're jumping, a good thing about paratrooping is the senior most officer jumps first, always. Okay, so whether it's a reconnaissance DZ or a new DZ or a drop zone, the senior most officer jumps first, and that's the tool that the paratroopers carry with them. And it's not so much the first jump that is talked about amongst the new paratroopers is the second one, because in the first one, you really don't know how it is going to be. So you do it. In the second one, you're acutely aware what's going to happen once you get out of the aircraft, or how you're going to line up, what's going to feel. And that's the one that people talk about the most. So that's the time that you have more awareness about what awaits. But all in all, a wonderful activity. The night jump was a little different. Difficult to judge. The ground comes at you when you are not suspecting it. But if you are fit and reasonably flexible, not a major ask. But as a paratrooper, I think presence of mind, because you have very little time between exiting an aircraft. It's for a static line jump, you at about 1,250 feet, which is not much actually. So presence of mind, courage, fitness and flexibility, like I said, and then of course a little X factor. Because the X factor, why I say that is because finally you're jumping out of a perfectly flying airplane. So it is an odd activity. And so in case you have these and we really can enjoy parachuting, I think it's a brilliant thing to do. And I enjoyed my time as a paratrooper.
Got it, sir. Sir, when you were in special forces and in combat, what was your favorite weapon back then?
Okay, my favorite weapon was, okay, let me first talk about personal weapon. My personal weapon was VZ-58V. Okay, so VZ-58 is a Czech weapon. Okay, it's looks like an AK, but not actually. It says none of the parts are similar to an AK. It's lighter, much lighter than an AK. And so I carried it for long years. My stock number was 288, and so it was it stayed with me. It's always, when we were sleeping also, it was by my side. And so the 58V is for airborne. So that's got a folding butt. Extremely good weapon. 800 rounds per minute is the firing rate for it. Fire the same ammunition as an AK-47. And because I had handled or used it so much, I was extremely accurate with it. So I really loved that weapon. And as far as cruiser weapon goes, I think within my team, the most cherished weapon that I carried was the 84mm rocket launcher. Saved us on many occasions. We would carry it loaded, and whenever we were surprised or we walked into an ambush or something, that's the weapon that saved the day for us. There are times when you're outnumbered by many times, and that's the weapon that actually saved us. And a lot of special forces small teams will swear by that weapon, because it's actually saved the day for them on many occasions. So that's the two weapons. Yeah.
Got it. So when you were a young officer, so how was your first experience in the combat? And now when you look back, what are the various learnings that you had from that?
Yeah, okay. So like any other SS soldier, I have had ample opportunities for combat experience, both low intensity, whether it was in Kashmir, or high intensity in the Kargil war. And the unique thing about special forces is that the learning start even before actual combat happens. So what happens is you're in the company of very accomplished people who have been there, done that, and you hear from them very casually about how operations unfolded, who did what could have been done better, and so on. So it becomes something that it seeps into you. You haven't been in combat yet, but it feels like you already know. And so when you're ready to apply all those things once you go into combat. Of course, there's always that little thing in the back of your head about your individual reaction in combat. That thing is always there. But because of this, this ambient knowledge which has actually seeped into you, you're actually ready to apply it. There's a sense of familiarity with battle conditions even before we step into it. So, decision making comes naturally to an officer, and I always feel it's a little slightly easier for an officer because the sense of responsibility already holds on a daily basis. And so body and mind are quickly, propelled into action, and you realize that your first combat had happened. It's already passed you by, and it was just another day in the office. So not a very overwhelming or a very remarkable event, so to say. But since you get asked a number of times, about which was the first time you had, so we can kind of remember it. But over a period of time, you've been through so many situations, you tend to mix up one with the other, and then you have to go back and look them up in the in the war diary to see, okay, I'm actually confusing him. So, you know, a lot of special forces soldiers will get together unless it's been really a remarkable event because of some either, you know, casualty we had or some event that was so remarkable wherein the district you remember. But you tend to, you know, after a period of years, you tend to kind of things, details do get a bit hazy. But yes, the first time you went into combat and actually, you know, experienced live firing and combat is something that does stay. So, like I said, learning does start before it even you know, go into it. But of course, there are a few learnings from combat that I hold very close to my heart. First is, of course, that initiative is everything. If you wait for it, you will end up on the losing side in combat. And particularly so for a small team that's out in operation in a hostile area, initiative is everything. So when you think things are going to go wrong, it's best to make them go wrong by taking the initiative and thereafter driving them. And so you have a positive control over the end result. You know, otherwise, if you wait, things may not go your way. You may lose initiative to the adversary. Next thing is that intelligence operations, they drive the spectacular operations. So not all special forces operations are spectacular. Some are really, you know, routine. But the spectacular ones that are there, they are intelligence driven. And so the special forces do spend a lot of time in generating and nurturing intelligence, you know, and thereafter launching their operations. Third, I think, you know, good learning is that there's no replacement for planning and rehearsals. You know, it's like it said, if you fail to plan, you're planning to fail, and that's very true. So one thing that distinguishes special forces, of course, is that they plan and they rehearse. So they have it down to a T. And you really cannot take too much of a chance with your planning in case, you know, you're a small team, because if things go wrong and suddenly you lose 2 or 3 people, there are not too many, very many people to, you know, to evacuate or even to react to the enemy. So then it causes a total annihilation of a small team. So you have to be very careful of how you plan, how you rehearse, how you react with initiative in the face of combat, insurmountable odds, but still you want to be on top of it, persistence, so on and so forth. Next, and an extremely important one is love your equipment, and your equipment will love you back. So you have to take care of it, not let you down in battle. Okay, there, you know, statistically there will be a lot of sad stories because the equipment malfunctioning, where equipment didn't fire at the time it was supposed to fire. But in case you love your equipment, you really take care of it. I'm extremely confident that, you know, the equipment will never let you down. And hope for the best and yet plan for the worst. I think this is the final learning that you have. So you have to be prepared with all kind of contingencies. So when you go out there, things can really go downhill, and you should be able to, you know, actually overcome those and still accomplish your mission. So so these are the few learnings you can have from that.
Got it, sir. So since you have served in the Indian Army for close to 2 decades, if I can ask you any 3 life lessons that you still cherish, what would they be? Any 3?
Oh, several. I mean, I am what I am because of my time I spent, and I'm really proud of the way I have served. I have been, you know, the opportunity that have come my way. I'm very grateful for those. And so yes, of course, a lot of life lessons. Okay, so 3 of them, I think one would be that nothing is impossible. Clearly, nothing is impossible if you have a, you know, good cause that you believe in, that your team believes in. You have an alpha team to make it happen. So, you know, we get to pick and choose our guys. So we have that team in place. And on top of that, if you add ethical and empathetic leadership, and voila, your mission is accomplished. So all in all, nothing is impossible if you have the right ingredients and the will to make it happen. The second thing is something that we picked up very long back in the academy, and that is actually the template for good leadership. The country first, the menu command next, and you last if at all. Okay, so that's a simplified template, checkbook credo, that is given to us, and, you know, we practice it. And I think that is something that we have put into practice during our years. We learned of it in IMA, and then we put it into practice during our years in the army, and I think it turned out very well, you know, as a leadership mantra. Third, I think, is something that the army allows you to do, and that is to speak your mind. Contrary to popular, you know, opinion, people think that, you know, army does not allow you to exercise your brains, and people are, you know, straight jacket and all that. I actually disagree with that. Army is one place where you can afford to be bold in what you stand for. Army allows you to have a voice, but it must be backed by an indispensable competence level. Okay, so if you are competent, you have enough space in the army to voice your opinion, speak your mind, be heard. There are various forum people look up to you, and so but you have to establish yourself as a competent person first. They say दूध देने वाली गाय की सब पूजा करते हैं, but it's true in the army also. However, no discussion beyond decision. So all the wargaming, all the ideas and everything, there will be a free flow, and particularly in a special forces battalion, everybody has a voice, everybody expresses it. But moment the decision is given, or it's time for decision, thereafter the discussion ceases. And thereafter you are supposed to own that plan along with the team. You may not agree with it, you may not agree with parts of it, but you will go and execute it as your plan. So those are the ethos that that I have learned from three top ones.
Got it, sir. So my final question to you would be, since a lot of aspirants will be watching this, what will be your message to all of them who wants to join the forces?
Okay. Yeah, so I think first step would be that be informed and exercise discretion. I'm not saying this only from the SSB or anything, from joining the armed forces point of view, but as a human being, be informed and exercise discretion. Don't give into, there's a lot of stuff floating around. So don't give into that. Exercise your discretion. Know what is good for the country. Know what is good for you and the people, your family and friends, and exercise judgment accordingly. Don't have a free flow, just because somebody else believes it, we go along. So that's one. Second and extremely important thing is retain the locus of control within yourself. Let me elaborate on that. What I'm saying is, don't blame anything onto external factors. So in case you're going for written exam of NDA or IMA and you don't make it, don't talk about how the paper was not expected, this, that, and the other, or any external factors. Moment you place the locus of control within yourself to say, okay, I need to recognize where am I lacking, you will be able to solve it and crack it next time. But moment you keep the control outside to blame other things for whatever your shortcomings or limitations or the way things panned out, then you're not doing justice to yourself, and you'll never be able to arrive at the shortcoming. You'll never be able to wargame it, and never be able to come up with a solution. And I think the last thing that I want to say, and which is very, very close to my heart, and is that be a good citizen. Be a good citizen now. Don't wait for something to happen or some situation to evolve where you want to express yourself as a good citizen. Be a good citizen in life, in routine life, and that is to say, be true to your country, and at the stage that you're in, what is a good citizen? I think it would be to respect your parents. They want nothing but the best for you. Don't take friends and family for granted. Be grateful that they are there. Why I'm saying this is because that's something that youth does not realize, things that they already have, value them. Okay, and choose the harder right over the easier wrong. Okay, so if you have this template of being a good citizen for you at this point in time, at the current age that you are in, jot down a few points and stick to those. And I think that you will never go wrong, because a good citizen will make a good armed forces officer. There's no two ways to it.
Got it. Thanks a lot, sir, for your time on this session and sharing your experiences in the Indian Army and various things that you have learned within your journey. So I hope a lot of people who will watch this will get a perspective about life in Indian Army, life in Special Forces. So thanks a lot, sir, for your time. Thank you, sir. Jai Hind.
Thanks for having me. Bye.